Hi, Vijay. Thank you very much for being with us today.
You're most welcome, Berta. My pleasure entirely.
Thank you. So I want to introduce you to our guest today. He's Vijay Bhatt. And Vijay is a consultant with many years of experience, and he helps people and organizations who find themselves in transition and change deal with all the turbulences that usually come with it. So he's specialized in strategic consulting, in leadership development, group training. He also does individual coaching and counseling. And I think that what's even more interesting to that is that he brings a unique perspective, because he is a cancer thriver, as he likes to call it. And I will use the same term that he uses. He's not a cancer survivor, he's a cancer thriver. So he has a holistic approach, and he just combines management, wisdom, because he's been in a leadership position for many years. He also has this experience of dealing with a disease like cancer, and he also brings kind of a psychological perspective to it. So without further ado, thank you again, Vijay. And I want to start this interview by getting probably to the starting the conversation, maybe talking about disease and how we can, like, the coronavirus, we all know, has shaken things a little bit. So as a cancer thriver, and also with your perspective as a coach, and you are also specialized with dealing with stress, resilience, anxiety. I mean, you've seen probably a lot of that in your life. So I would say, what would be your top 3 lessons or recommendations from a personal experience that you think are relevant for the COVID-19 crisis that we are all facing?
Yeah, great question, Berta. First of all, I'd just like to provide some perspective for your audience, right? As of today, when I look at the data, I can see that almost 200,000 people have already died due to COVID-19. That is an enormous number. So if you take the first 4 months of 2020, about 200,000 people have died. Having said that, in the first 4 months of 2020, almost 3 million people have died of cancer. So I wanted to just provide that perspective, because if you can see the panic that the world is in right now, with maybe 2 million infections and 200,000 deaths, it's actually not very much compared to the fact that almost 3 million people have died already in the same period of time. So I find it quite interesting, actually, to see how the world is reacting right now to COVID-19, when we have almost taken cancer for granted. So I think that we have a lot of lessons to learn from cancer, and I hope to share some of them with your audience today. So what are my top lessons? If you will permit me, I'll give you 4 lessons rather than 3.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so the first is that I like to say, the name of my organization is Cancer Awakens. But actually, the truth is that all crisis awakens. That crisis wakes us up. And crisis wakes us up because these kinds of crises force us to confront our own mortality, our own death, our own vulnerability, our own fragility. And when we confront that fragility, when we confront that mortality, it changes us inside. And it therefore presents an opportunity for us to reset and completely relook at our lives. So for me, just like with cancer, the COVID-19 crisis is a wake-up call for all of us in humanity. And I wish that we as humanity will use it as a wake-up call. So that's my lesson number 1. My lesson number 2 is that we have seen with cancer, and I'm also seeing it now with COVID-19, is that most people react to it in one of 3 ways, right? A lot of people react like victims. this happened to me. I don't know how this happened. I don't know why this happened. I'm suffering. Everybody else is suffering. I'm the victim here. And many people never come out of that victim mindset or victim mentality. There are some people who their mindset is, I'm a survivor. I'm a fighter. I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to succeed. I'm going to beat this. Right? That is the survivor mindset, and that's a good mindset to have. But in my opinion, it's not enough. The third mindset, which is the mindset that we recommend when people are dealing with cancer or with any crisis, is to be a thriver. So a thriver is somebody who not only accepts the crisis, but actually embraces it and says, look, I think I can use this crisis as a springboard or a platform for my own growth and transformation and for society's growth and transformation. So now the thing is, what choice are we going to make when we are confronted with a crisis? Are we going to be victims? Are we going to be survivors? Or are we going to be thrivers? So that would be my second lesson. The third lesson that I would like to talk about is that I don't know about Barcelona and Spain, but in India, we have a lot of potholes and speed bumps on the road, right? So when you have a serious illness, most people think of it like a bump in the road. Oh, there is a bump in the road. I will go over it. It'll be over. It'll be behind me. And then things will be back to normal again. But things like cancer and things like COVID are not bumps in the road. They are forks in the road. That means they present us with a choice of which direction we want to go in. And some people will take that fork in the road and walk on a new path which has not been done before. And a lot of people will stay on the old path. The people who take the new path will be the leaders, will be the forward thinkers, will be the progressives. They will demonstrate a higher level of consciousness. Whereas the people who follow and stay on the old path may not do that. So again, this is a choice. Will you treat the crisis as a bump in the road, or will you treat it as a fork in the road? And the last one is that whether it is cancer or whether it is COVID, immunity is the key. In other words, all the medical stuff, the vaccines, all of that, what it is trying to do is ultimately to activate our own immunity. So whether it is cancer or whether it is any other serious illness or whether it is COVID-19, our long-term recovery depends on how strong our immune system is. And so my message to all your audience is to say, look, let the doctors do what they are doing. Let the governments do what they are doing. You focus on strengthening your immune system. That is the best thing that you can do for yourself and for your family. So those would be my top 4 lessons.
I mean, I think what really struck me about what you've just said, I've taken notes. I really like the sentence, crisis wakes us up. I think that is something we are all seeing. I mean, you can see probably that COVID-19 has been a great accelerator of collaboration between governments, between institutions inside countries. And I think that this level of consciousness that you were just mentioning will be something that if we are able to embrace as communities and we are all moving towards that direction. I mean, I wish many people will be able to see that in the fork, in our way, we all need to take a new road and just like go towards the consciousness, this more caring society that we see that it's needed, especially in times of crisis. So yeah, thank you very much for these 4 recommendations. I think they're great. And when dealing with disease, I also wanted to ask you, I mean, many people have been impacted. I mean, we know the numbers are small compared to the ones of the cancer that you mentioned, because I think that was also really enlightening. I mean, I didn't know that was the numbers that were managed. But I mean, right now we have a lot of people that are dealing with disease. They probably didn't expect it also. So you have this kind of shock that comes with disease. But also I think that what's making this situation a little bit difficult for these people might be the separation, like the physical separation between people, because right now their friends, their families, they might be getting sick and they cannot be with them because, I mean, in most countries we need to like have this physical distance between people. So how would you recommend them to or do you have any recommendations or tips for these people that are dealing with disease without being close to the ones they love, or disease or death even in some cases?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's a very powerful question. See, what has happened with us in modern society is that we are not used to dealing with death. We deny death and we tend to push it away until we have no choice.
Yeah.
Whereas in traditional societies, they used to honor death. They used to include death as part of all their social rituals and so on and so on and so on. So therefore, the shock right now for us as a modern society is greater than it may have been in traditional societies, right? So we've got to accept that that is the case. So my tips or suggestions is that if you cannot be there with a loved one in person because of the current constraints, at least be there with them in spirit. And sometimes we underestimate how important that communion in spirit is, and how important that communion through energy is, even if physically you cannot be together with somebody. And so I would invite everybody who has a loved one who is suffering or who is even dying to come together, to meditate, to pray, to hold hands, to remember them, to send them good wishes in spirit, because I think it makes a difference. I know it makes a difference, actually. I have benefited from that personally. So that's one. The second thing I would say is that, this thing will be over at some stage, right? And we will find a new normal. But even when that is happening, my advice is don't leave your unfinished business with each other until too late. I think we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our loved ones to express yourself, whether it is to express gratitude or express yourself, whether it is to seek forgiveness or to, mend your fences and to deal with the issues that we need to deal with. And this kind of enforced distance tells us how important that is. So we really don't want somebody who is dying to die with regrets. And we don't want somebody who's left behind to also carry regrets. So what can you do to finish your unfinished business as soon as possible is really a question I would ask everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. I mean, I feel like in times like this where probably a hug is not possible, it's also comforting to have or to know that you have people around you that care about you. So I mean, I've seen that in the last few weeks. I mean, people that you usually probably don't communicate with this situation, they are all reaching out. So it's just like, I think that it's also nice for those that are not in the best position now because they are sick in the hospital or whatever, to have these people that they value also like reaching out and helping them. So now on to the business part, because as you may know, we are an organization. We help professionals and we help companies be more conscious. So on this front, and also knowing that you have been in leadership positions for many years, you also have been a coach. I think that you also have a great insight probably on the business side of things. And I wanted to ask you, in times of uncertainty like the ones that we are living, how would you recommend leaders to like act and to face this crisis, face the uncertainty, how would you approach a conversation with a leader that's in this position?
Yeah. See, we talked about crisis being a wake-up call. Crisis is also a wake-up call for leaders, because this is the test of your leadership. It's all very well to be a leader in good times, but to lead through a crisis calls for tremendous character and tremendous courage. So, as you know, my wife and better half, Nilima, she's the founder of Shakti Leadership, and she talks about stepping in, stepping up, and stepping out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what leaders need to do right now in the crisis is exactly those three things.
Can you explain those a little bit? Because I'm not familiar with them.
I'm going to do that. So stepping in means really going inwards and finding a way to anchor yourself, finding a way to center yourself, finding a way to ground yourself. Because, as we all know, the calmest place in the storm is at the center of the storm. It's called the eye of the storm. So at this moment, you have to be able to draw your strength from your center, from deep within yourself. So stepping in means going within to find those internal resources. Stepping up means stepping up to the challenges that are being thrown at you as a leader, whether it is business challenges, whether it is regulatory challenges, whether it is shareholder pressure, whether it is partners, vendors, employees, right? Everyone is throwing these challenges at you. And just like you would expect a leader in battle to step up and take charge of the situation, I would say that a leader has to, at this moment, step up and take charge. And the third part is really stepping out, which is to say that you cannot be locked in your own ivory tower. You may be physically in lockdown or physically in isolation, but as a leader, you've got to be out there with your teams. You've got to be present with them, even if it is long distance on Zoom or Skype or WebEx or phone or whatever it is. You've got to be out there as much as possible, because soldiers need to see their leaders in battle. And so if you don't step in, if you don't step up, and if you don't step out and really demonstrate your character and courage at this moment, then you wasted the crisis.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about the supporting a team aspect that you were just mentioning. How do you think leaders can support their teams better right now? Do you have any recommendations, techniques, suggestions that you would be willing to share?
Of course. See, a crisis makes everyone's, I call them the PNCV, purposes, concerns, needs, and vulnerabilities. A crisis always magnifies them. A crisis always amplifies them. And so at normal times, we may keep them under the surface, but in a crisis, our purposes, needs, concerns, and vulnerabilities come up. You can see that in the media. You can see that when you attend any kind of a debate, or even at a dinner, you will see that everyone is anxious at this moment, right? So I think the leader has to recognize and accept that people are going to be somewhat skittish and nervous and anxious at this point in time. And he has to be willing to listen to that much more deeply than he or she may otherwise do. And at the same time, I think a leader also needs to share his or her own purposes, needs, concerns, and vulnerabilities at this time, because that is when a leader becomes authentic. So I would say that the more communication there is between the leader and his team around the human aspects, not just the business aspects, about what is driving somebody, what are people afraid of, what are their hopes, what are their fears, I think is going to make for a much healthier recovery. So that would be one. The second thing I would say is that in times like these, leaders have to make tough decisions, right? They may have to shut down a factory. They may have to let people go. They may have to all take salary cuts, right? They may have to change the contracts that they have with their suppliers. And so the question is that when you're making all these tough decisions, can you make them also from that state of presence, from a state of compassion? This is where the consciousness part of it really comes in. It's one thing to make a tough business decision, but it's another thing to do it consciously from a space of presence and from a state of compassion. So can leaders find it in themselves to recognize that they have a duty and an obligation to make tough decisions, but as much they have a duty and an obligation to do it with presence and to do it with compassion and to do it graciously. So if they can find that balance, I think they will be excellent leaders.
I think that's really, really interesting. Right now, we have each other. Let's lean on that. Let's double down on personal connections, both what you were talking before when dealing with your family, friends, be there for them, but then also don't forget about your teams because they are also part of your human network of connections. So
correct.
Yeah, really nice concept too. And our last question, but I think that we have at least one for the Q&A part. Mm-hmm. Our last question that we wanted to ask you was what skills you would recommend us all to develop during this time to really take the most out of this opportunity that this crisis has given us?
Yeah, I want to, if you don't mind, I want to tell you a small story.
Yeah,
this is a story that comes from ancient Greece as well as from ancient China. Greece is the center of Western civilization, and China and India have been the centers of Eastern civilization. And so the story comes from both these civilizations. You know, the story is about a big, strong oak tree that used to look down upon this little thin reed near the riverside. And the oak tree was very proud and strong, and this reed was very thin and humble. But when the big storm came, the oak tree was toppled and the reed survived. And so to me, the idea that we have got to be flexible and we have got to be humble and that we have got to bend and not break at a time like this is probably the most important lesson or tip that I can give to people. Now, if you see how countries are responding right now, you can see that some countries are responding like oak trees. And some countries are responding like that humble reed. Guess who will survive? Similarly, within a country, some people will respond like oak trees when the storm is there. And some people will respond like reeds. Who will survive? In an organization, some people will respond like oak trees. Some people will respond like reeds. Who will survive? So for me, cultivating that flexibility and cultivating humility at a time like this is probably the most important thing that I would like to say. The second thing is that this situation is going to continue for a long time. This is not going to be over in a month or 2 or 3. I mean, I see this continuing for an extended period. And so the stress levels are going to increase because we are going to be dealing with a completely new reality. And I guess all the work that we have done tells us that stress is multidimensional, that we should not look at stress only from a physical standpoint or from a biological standpoint. We have got to look at stress from an emotional standpoint. We have got to look at it from a mental standpoint. We have got to look at it, address it from a relationship standpoint. And we have also got to deal with it from a spiritual standpoint. You can imagine the questions that are going on in people's minds right now regarding spirituality and God and religion and all of those things when you're faced with this kind of a crisis. And that is going to create a whole lot of stress. So I guess what I would say to people is to recognize that Stress is going to be there, it's going to increase. Again, it comes back to, do you have a state of presence? Do you have the resilience? Do you have the flexibility? Do you have the humility? And can you deal with stress at all these 5 levels rather than taking a unidimensional view of stress? The last thing I would say is that, look, it's okay to be vulnerable at a time like this. It's, our mortality puts us in touch with our vulnerable and our fragile side. And maybe that is the most precious outcome that will come from this crisis. So I would say it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to be kind to yourself. It's okay to lose your composure sometimes. And therefore, my last tip to everyone is, please don't lose your sense of humor. Because one of the great safety valves that nature has blessed humanity with is humor. That if we can find a way to see the amusing side and the funny side and the farcical side and the crazy side of what is going on, then hopefully we will come out of this stronger and with a smile on our faces.
I really love this positive perspective and this positive note to finish the conversation, at least the part that we had already prepared beforehand. But yeah, I would definitely agree with your recommendations on developing flexibility, humility, vulnerability, and also like being aware that stress affects us in many, many ways, and we need to be able to cope with that. So definitely the humor will be our great ally for that.
Yes.
So before closing, we have questions from our live audience. So I wanted to ask you, can you share a personal example when you faced a similar crisis in business, and what did it take?
That's a great question. I happen to have been in the center of the Asian economic crisis in 1997, when there was a financial crisis in Asia, and we had something like this, where currencies dropped by 90% in value, and business just came to a standstill. It may not have affected Europe and the US to the same extent, but I was in the thick of it. I was doing an Asia Pacific job at that time. And I know what happened to my client. The client that I was working on was Unilever, which is a very, very big and successful multinational firm. And I was working myself for a multinational ad agency called Ogilvy and Mather. And I could see both at the Unilever side, how they dealt with it, how they tried to find a way by which they kept their business continuity, and they kept their brand values, and they kept their culture strong. And yet they had to make all these very tough decisions about people, about factories, about so many things. In the same way, Ogilvy, where I was working, we also had to do exactly the same things, where we had to find a way to both, as they say, you have to fix the plane while you're flying it. You have to keep things going, and yet you have to plan for the new. And so my personal experience really comes from that. And I know for a fact that Ogilvy emerged from that crisis stronger as an organization. And Unilever emerged from that crisis stronger as an organization. And so I draw strength from that experience of my life. In the personal side, of course, cancer has been my greatest teacher. So everything that I have spoken about, I have personally experienced in my cancer journey.
We have another question coming, and I think that after this one, we'll close for today.
Okay.
It's been a really interesting conversation. So this one is, money has been kind of the myth that has enabled collaboration to a massive scale through the market. Do you think this virus will help us learn how to collaborate without money?
Collaborate without money?
Yep.
The famous saying that money is the root of all evil. Actually, that's not the correct saying. The correct saying is the love of money is the root of all evil. So I want to draw a distinction between money per se and its relevance to our economy and to our society, and the love of money, which is completely different. So for me, I don't think money will go away or money should go away, because money plays a very, very important role in the world going around. But the love of money, the unnatural, disproportionate, greedy love of money, that I hope will go away, and that I hope will make the world into a far better place. So I want to draw the distinction between money per se and greed. I don't think money should go away. I think money should be used for all the services it provides. But the love of money and the greed, I hope, will reduce and hopefully go to zero.
We have a last one. I'm really sorry.
Okay,
we have
that's
one
fine.
And I think this one will be very useful for everyone. Do you have some techniques on how we can quell our fears and settle our minds in such unsettling times?
Yes. I was going to talk about it earlier, but we didn't get the opportunity. We talked about centering, we talked about stepping in. So actually what we have created is a 10-minute presence practice. And it's a very simple, very powerful, very potent practice. It does not have any religious or connotations, but it's a practice that I have taught to literally thousands of people around the world. And many people benefit from it. We teach it to all our cancer clients as well, as all the leadership, all the corporate clients as well. So I would say that any practice that returns you to the state of presence, whether it is our practice or another practice, it really doesn't matter. If you can find a way to change that inner state and find the state of presence, that is your best insurance against fear and anxiety and worry and so on and so on and so on. It doesn't mean that the reality outside is going to change overnight, but your internal reality, your ability to deal with issues will become so much better if you can find that presence practice. So if any of your readers or viewers are interested, I'm happy to share a link. It's available on our website. But I'm not imposing this particular practice. Any presence practice is equally effective as long as it gives you the state of presence.
Yeah, I mean, we would be more than happy to add this link to the YouTube video that will be posted on our channel, so we can have it there for anyone that views this video in the future, and they can take a look at this 10-minute.
I'll be delighted to share that link.
Thank you very much. And with this, we will close the interview. Thank you very much, Vijay, for your time today. It's been really interesting, and I think that we can all walk away and go back to our day with many insights on how we can make the best out of this probably not so good situation for anyone. So thanks again, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Berta. And since your session is called Thank God It's Friday, I hope that you and your viewers will make the most of this Friday evening, despite all the constraints. And I wish everyone well. May you be healthy. May you be happy. May you be free from all suffering.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.